Hello and welcome back. In this little video, we are going to be listening to Dr. Boyev explain autonomic nervous system drugs as only she can. And I will pause on occasion and I will speed her up as appropriate. So here we go. I think. Maybe not. Let's try that again. There we go.
Nervous system. Hey, listen, before we start though, go back and watch that video about the bear chasing the little girl. And this is the doll that you want to look for. She's being chased by a bear in the woods. Go watch that about 2 or 3 times, and then come right back. Hopefully you watched that video and now you know all the actions of the sympathetic nervous system, like dilated eyes, dry mouth, dry secretions in general, dry eyes included. You have most of the non-essential blood vessels are constricted. That increases blood pressure. You have stronger and faster heart contractions. You have slowed, constipated intestines. You have increased bronchial capacity. You have reduced urine flow. If you happen to be in labor, you'll suppress the contractions of the uterus, and then you will have dilation of the essential arteries like the ones in your legs. I should say sexual function is both parasympathetic and sympathetic. That's kind of weird. The way that I learned in medical school, the sexual function is a dirty mnemonic. Close your eyes for a second if you don't want to see something gross. But the way we learned it was point and shoot. So it was for erection and ejaculation, and then the similar for female orgasm. Sweating is also kind of weird because I'm not going to ask you about that.
Don't worry about this.
What I want to do is go through a bunch of mnemonics and not really tricks, but things to know about the autonomic nervous system that will help you learn all the drugs, side effects, contraindications, indications, all those things without having to memorize very much stuff. First thing, you got the sympathetic and you got the parasympathetic nervous system. All right, the sympathetic are all those things we just talked about. The parasympathetic opposes that. Parasympathetic opposes pretty much all the actions of the sympathetic, because if you have 2 opposing systems, then you can fine-tune all of those little actions. All right, so let's first talk about the heart, because I think that's the easiest one to wrap your head around. When you talk about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic actions on the heart, you're not talking about a tug of war, really. You're talking about a shoving match, okay? So I've got some graphics to show this, okay? So the way I like to think about it is think of 2 teams pushing against each other, and maybe there's a team of 3 people on each side. Okay, and at just the normal rate of heart rate, because hearts can beat even if they aren't even connected to your body, right? So there's a normal natural pace of the heart. Now, there's always going to be some secretion of norepinephrine from the sympathetic nerves and acetylcholine from the parasympathetic nerves on the SA node of the heart. The norepinephrine binds beta-1 receptors. The acetylcholine binds muscarinic receptors. Okay, norepinephrine's action.
Okay, I want to make sure that you get this point. Both parts of the autonomic nervous system are acting simultaneously. Sometimes one will act more than the other one, but we kind of have neurotransmitters kind of dripping out all the time. The norepinephrine from the sympathetic side binds to what we call the beta-1 receptors. And medications called beta blockers, they act on this receptor. On the parasympathetic side, the vagus nerve is producing acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter, and the cholinergic receptor that responds to that are these muscarinic cholinergic receptors, and that's why they're shown here with an M. And so both things are happening simultaneously, and she shows it as this kind of shoving match.
Is to increase heart rate. Acetylcholine's action is to reduce heart rate. Now that is something you do have to memorize. When we give a sympathetic agonist drug, so a beta-1 agonist, what we're essentially doing is we are giving another teammate to the sympathetic side. So the parasympathetic side is still there, but we've overwhelmed it with source because with extra resources, because now we have the beta-1 agonist giving extra yays in addition to the norepinephrine yays, and the sympathetic side wins, and so the heart rate goes up. All right. Now, what if instead we give a cholinergic blocker, an anticholinergic, as they say? So if we give just an anticholinergic, no sympathetic anything, what it's like taking away some of the people on the cholinergic side. So now we just still have our same normal three guys on our sympathetic side, or girls, and so the sympathetic side wins the shoving match in that situation. So again, the heart rate goes up. Similarly, if we give a cholinergic agonist, they can overwhelm the sympathetic side. So now our heart rate goes down because acetylcholine binds muscarinic receptors and slows heart rate. And then last, if we give a beta 1 blocker, so norepinephrine can't bind, it's like taking away some of the sympathetic players. And so now, once again, the heart rate goes down. Now, what's going to happen? Here's a critical thinking question. What happens if you give a beta blocker?
Let's slow that down again.
And a cholinergic agonist at the same time. Well, now there's that shoving match is going to go way down, right? Because now you've taken out what the opposing team and you've increased the resources of the team that drives down the heart rate. So the heart rate is going to go way down. And then what would happen if you gave the beta 1 agonist and an anticholinergic? You could figure that one out. All right. So if you think of the two teams as shoving matches, you can always sort of figure out what the heart rate will do. Will it go up or down? And similarly, you could do this with the other actions in the autonomic nervous system. We're going to show you that in a second. Okay, so now what I've done here is I've made a little table. It's so cute. Okay, so I'm going to start out with the sympathetic agonists. All right, so the action of the sympathetic agonists. All right, let's just start with heart rate again. The sympathetic agonist will increase heart rate. Okay, now a sympathetic blocker will do the opposite.
Okay, I'm going to remind you of something that you learned before when we were talking about the heart. We're going to increase heart rate because we're going to make depolarization of the SA node happen more quickly. Those leak channels are going to happen faster. We're going to get to threshold faster. We're going to depolarize more often.
Opposites, yes? So the sympathetic antagonist or blocker will reduce heart rate.
And the way the reduction in the heart rate happens is we slow down how quickly those SA node cells depolarize, and then they would hyperpolarize. So we're really going to slow down the way the heart is going to pump.
Cool. The parasympathetic side, we just said, is always opposing the sympathetic side. So we know that that's going to decrease heart rate. And if we give a blocker of the parasympathetic side, then you are going to increase heart rate because it's the opposite of the parasympathetic. Now notice there's like a pattern here, right? It's, the diagonals are equal, okay? So if you know one of these 4 boxes, if you have one of the 4 boxes memorized, you have all the other 4 boxes memorized because you just can figure it out. And in fact, I still sometimes just figure it out because I'm like, okay, sympathetic side does this, so I know parasympathetic agonist or antagonist or sympathetic blocker does this. It's just easier it takes less time to figure it out than to try to memorize some mnemonic for every single drug. All right, now this works for every action of the autonomic nervous system. So for instance, dilated pupils, a sympathetic agonist, an alpha-1 agonist, will dilate pupils. A anticholinergic, like something with trope in it, like atropine, will dilate eyes. Parasympathetic agonist and a sympathetic blocker will make your pupils tiny. Also, like with bladder flow, which I should mention, don't bother memorizing for the bladder. I've seen it in so many textbooks where they say, oh, in the bladder, the sympathetic side makes your sphincter, your urethral sphincter tight and your bladder wall relaxed. Well, okay, but what you really want to memorize is just that you don't pee when you have sympathetic input because you don't want a bear to follow your pee when it's chasing you through the woods. That's the thing to memorize because you can always figure out, okay, yeah, if I'm holding in my pee, then obviously the sphincter is closed and the wall isn't squeezing, so it must be relaxed. You don't have to memorize the different things. That's a waste of time. Just remember you're not peeing. Simple, right? And then when you have a sympathetic blocker, probably like a Zosyn type drug, ends with Zosyn, that is going to be something where you have a lot of urine flow. In fact, you might even have incontinence, right? Similarly, cholinergic drugs, lots of urine flow, nice big stream. And with anticholinergics, you're going to have dribbling and difficulty with urination. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, the last little trick I want to give you is how I remember the sympathetic receptors, because you don't have to really remember the muscarinic receptors too much, at least for my class, because there's not a lot of very specific drugs. There's like atropine that blocks everything. And then there's a bunch of other little drugs that sort of don't act on the heart too much. And probably within a couple of years, there'll be some drugs that are specific to certain receptors on the muscarinic side, but right now I'm not worried about it. All right.
All right, before she shares that with you, because I'm afraid I'm going to forget if I don't point this out, if I'm not mistaken, she is wearing serotonin on her necklace. I love her.
So this is how I remember the sympathetic receptors. Beta looks like a heart, right? So beta, and you have one heart. So beta 1 is the heart, okay? When you're first learning these, just remember beta 1 is the heart. Later, you'll remember beta 1 is heart and kidneys and some other stuff. It's fine, okay? Beta 2, you have 2 lungs next to the heart. So beta 2 is lungs and then legs, the major arteries in the legs, lungs and legs. Beta 2, 2 lungs, 2 legs, hopefully. And then everything else is alpha 1. Da-na-na-na-na-na. Easy, easy, easy. Okay, that's how I remember it. So that's that. I'm going to come back with a different video for how to figure out all the indications, contraindications, and side effects for these autonomic drugs. But it's easy. You don't have to memorize them all. Just figure it out. It's simple.
All right, so beta 1 receptors on the heart, beta 2 receptors on the lungs and the big arteries going to the leg muscles, and alpha 1 on the non-essential vessels. And that's why we get increase in blood pressure. And I think that is it for this one. I do recognize that this is not a pharmacology class, but I'm doing my best to set you up for success in your pharmacology class. All right, and that is it for us for this video.